You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spent. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking Time for Hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. You are listening to Time for Hemp all around the world on a variety of social platforms. If you like our program, please make it a point to share us with your friends. Hit the like button below if there is one. And by all means, let everybody around you know how important it is to take Time for Hemp. We are kicking off the show today, focusing on veterans of the military. And we have an amazing representative on the program today. Bryan Buckley will be joining us. We also have, as usual, the joint host, Byrne, here on the program. He is the resident joint host on the big broadcast and handling the controls and making this thing run smooth as most people smoke good herb is our friend Al Graham. And he's also going to be acting as a joint host on the big broadcast. And don't forget, anytime you hear the word joint on the Time for Hemp segment, hit your pipes, your bongs, your vaporizers, your vape pens. Hit whatever it is that you hit to take Time for Hemp. I'm going to turn the big broadcast over to our resident joint host, Al Byrne. Al?
Resident. Is that what I am? I'm the resident?
Resident. Well, that's what they referred to Ed McMahon on the Johnny Carson show. He was the resident joint host.
Well, then that's a compliment. If it's Ed McMahon that I'm going to mimic, that's fine with me. He was a great guy. And by the way, was a Marine officer. Again, I keep putting out a lot of really neat people in our society have done some really neat things, have been in the military, and I think learned a lot of skills in that regard. I know I did. I went to Notre Dame and I spent 4 years in ROTC. So, my youth was certainly, involved with military history and military bearing and the concepts of honor, et cetera, et cetera. And I think those were all worthwhile traits that they were given to me freely. And I took them, and I'm glad I did. And a guy that we're interviewing today had the same kind of path. We were both college athletes. He went in the Navy, I went in the Army, and we both saw combat. So in that regard, we had a similar background until his military career was ended with serious wounding. But I'll let him tell you what he wants to. And so I'm going to introduce a guy that I've known for several years, 6, 7, maybe. We've known each other more so lately. His name is Bryan Buckley. He has quite a resume, which we'll start off with on the veteran issue. So Al, bring Bryan in here, please. There he is. That's my friend Bryan Buckley.
Hey, Bryan.
I want you to give us the basic thing. I grew up you grew up somewhere, and tell, where did you grow up? I know you were a football player in college. You can brag it up. Go ahead. And then you got the Marine Corps. Good for you. You can brag it up. Go ahead. And just, tell us how it is. And then And then, of course, when you're done with all that making yourself look good stuff, the question comes up like, where and how did you find cannabis? Okay. Right. But let me ask you a military question. Something when I looked at your resume and I realized what my past had been, the term Marine Raider came up. Now, I've heard you use that talking about you and your guys, but I realized that I was served on a destroyer back in 1965, 66, 67. That was the DD-712, but it was the USS Gyatt, G-Y-A-T-T, Private Edward Earl Gyatt, U.S. Marine Corps, is what the ship was named after. The guy that the ship was named after. He received a Silver Star posthumously, unfortunately, in the Solomon Islands. But he was a Marine Raider.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you guys were new. Tell us about Marine Raiders, how they came about, and what do you do with them?
No, that's a great question. So the Marine Raiders were formed back in World War II and arguably are the first special operations unit of the United States military. And kind of funny, my aunt, her father was a Marine Raider in World War II. So what they did was they found guys who, maybe physically were a little bit above the average and things like that. My aunt's father was a machine gunner. And they asked them, they're like, hey, you can join this group we're putting together here for the island hopping campaign called Marine Raiders. And we'll give you 3 more days of leave or vacation if you join. And he's like, oh, wow, like 3 more days of leave. That's great. I'll do it. And then he's like, then I'm on Guadalcanal and hell's breaking loose. And he starts thinking, I don't know if I'm going to see these 3 days that they're promising me. And essentially what the Raiders were doing at that time frame was they would go out in the Zodiacs. They would go and basically get on the island prior to the main attack force and kind of do a preparation of the environment to make sure, where to land, what was going on, kind of paint a picture for them. And the Raiders were doing amazing work. And then midway through World War II, they're kind of like, we don't really need the Raiders anymore. So they disband them and put them back into their conventional infantry units. So some of the Marine infantry units still use the term Raiders, which there's been a little bit of, contingency back and forth about who's a Raider and who's not. To me, it's all good. But what happened with, I would say, the Marine Raiders 2.0 was, I find this to be an interesting story. It's kind of a little bit of history here. But in 1979, we were doing Operation Eagle Claw, which was the rescue mission to get the hostages out of the embassy in Iran during the Iranian Revolution. And probably most famously is, was it a Checkpoint 1 or I forget what that was called. But anyway, they had a basically checkpoint. They're all landing there. You had Navy SEALs, you had Green Berets, you had the Air Force, and you had the Marine Corps. And they had an in-air collision. I believe it was with a CH-53 helicopter and a C-130 collided, exploded, and the mission was pretty much aborted at that point, and we left. And it ended with basically the Iranians holding up like U.S. Air Force shrapnel and everything. Obviously, an incredibly embarrassing day for America, for President Carter and all of that. So the Department of Defense started thinking, hey, we got these special operation units in each of the military units, but they're not really all talking to each other. So they formed Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, came from that. And when they were like, hey, we're going to put Navy SEALs, we're going to put Green Berets, we'll put Marine Recon, and so on and so forth, the Marine Corps pushed back. And one thing about the Marine Corps is they do not like other people in charge of Marines except for Marines. And the way they were kind of able to, keep that at an arm's length is we have what we call Marine Expeditionary Units, or MUs. And you always have 2 MUs out at a time from the East Coast, West Coast. Sometimes out in Okinawa, they pop out as well. And they would make them special operations capable. So you would have the reconnaissance guys there, or the SEALs could fly in and do a mission, the Green Berets, so on and so forth. And everything was fine. And then 9/11 happened. And essentially, President Bush and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld called the Marine Corps and said, we're not asking you, we're telling you, you are going to have a special operations unit that's going to fall in Special Operations Command. That's just the way the world is going. It's going to be more of these surgical type strikes against these terrorist organizations. So what they did is they took the reconnaissance all-stars, if you will, and these were some bad dudes. I mean, these were legendary guys in reconnaissance. And they put them together and formed what they called Marine Detachment 1, or Det 1, which is more well known. It was based out here in Camp Pendleton, and they fell under the command of Naval Special Warfare, or the Navy SEALs. And essentially, it was kind of their proof of concept. Would this work? The Marines went out to Iraq. They kicked ass. The Navy SEALs are like, yeah, they can do it. And what happened at that point was the Force Recon flag went down and the MARSOC, or Marine Special Operations Command, flag went up. And so part of the deal was that one force platoon from each coast, from the East Coast and West Coast, would remain with the Marine Corps, and then the rest would go over to SOCOM. So SOCOM would have operational control, not administrative control. The Marine Corps still controlled that. And then that's kind of how it started rolling. Now, I'll kind of make this quick because I know I'm talking for a little bit here. You know, fast forward, we have MARSOC, you have Navy SEALs, you have Green Berets, and all this stuff. Well, my last big boss was a gentleman named Admiral McCraven, who is probably best known as the 3-star commander of Joint Special Operations Command. And he planned the raid to go kill Osama bin Laden. Obviously, that raid went well. He got his 4th star. They bumped him up to the commander of SOCOM. And Admiral McCraven is a fantastic flag officer. I know Al will back me on this one. Sometimes those flag officers become pretty political and will kind of do the Washington, D.C. dance. Not McCraven. He will call it like it is. And he was just an outstanding leader. So we had him over at our compound at the time it was called 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion. And we had a room called the Helman room. We cut our teeth in the Helman province, and we're definitely going to talk more about that during the interview. And during that, one of my good friends, and by the time he left, he was probably the most highly decorated Marine Raider. His name was Master Sergeant Bryan Buckley, and he was awarded a Navy Cross, which is one medal behind the Medal of Honor. And arguably, I think the guy should have got the Medal of Honor. But I remember he walked up to me and he's like, hey, I'm going to ask the Admiral, do the Marine Corps generals even like us? And I'm like, yeah, go for it, So Admiral McCraven's kind of doing his talk, and he's like, any questions? And Brian raises his hand, and Admiral McCraven's like, yeah, Brian, what's up? And he's like, Admiral, do our generals like us? And he just gets a big smile on his face, and he's like, listen, Jimmy Amos, who at the time was the Commandant of the Marine Corps 4-star, he's like, Jimmy is like my drinking buddy. We go out in D.C. all the time. He loves you guys. He's like, if he had his way, he would paint the MARSOC symbol on every MEU ship that we had. He's like, so he loves you, but the other 3- and 2-star generals, no, they don't like you guys. But he's like, hey, I'm a Navy SEAL. No one likes us. So he's like, welcome to the club. But he said in that, he goes, you guys need to be, it needs to be different. You guys need to be recognized for who you are. So I'm going to push to get the Marine Raider name designated for you. And you guys need some sort of warfare pin. Like, the Navy SEALs have their trident, stuff like that. That's very visible. And, to kind of conclude this part where it all came to be and when we got redesignated Marine Raiders, General Amos was getting ready to retire. And I'll never forget, we're on a video teleconference with Admiral McCraven, and he's asking, when would we have a Marine officer that would be a Theater Special Operations Commander, which is like a 2-star? And McCraven's like, you're never going to get it. And he goes, why not? He's like, because you have your officers in special ops for 2 years, you send them back to their primary MOS, or military occupation specialty, and then they come back over to MARSOC, but they miss 2 years for, key builds they would need to have in order to obtain a TSOC command. And he's like, oh, well, then I'll just close loop the officers. And he's like, he's like, come on, Jim, I've been asking for the past couple of years. He goes, yeah, well, we'll do it now. And he goes, and you know what I'm going to also do? I'm going to redesignate the Marine Raiders as well. And McCraven laughs and he's like, "You really are retiring, aren't you?" He goes, "Oh yeah, I'm going to throw a big old frag grenade behind my back as I walk out the door." And sure enough, the MARSOC flag went down and the Marine Raider flag went up. And what was great was obviously Marine Raider stuff is awesome. But what I took probably the most pride in was seeing some of the original Marine Raiders from World War II that we flew out for the ceremony. And you just saw the tears in their eyes where they were like, our legacy is going to get remembered. Our unit's going to get remembered, because it was just very bizarre. The Marine Corps is super big on its lineage and what has happened, but the Raiders were kind of like that drunk uncle they didn't want to talk about, like, kind of put it in the corner a little bit. So to be able to get that Raider flag back up, we were able to hand the original Raiders the actual new Marine Raider warfare pin. It was just an amazing time. And, circle back to my my aunt, she was just overwhelmed because that was her father's unit. And for it to come back into existence was a big deal. So, yeah, the Marine Raiders, I think we got the redesignation back in like 2013 or 14 timeframe. So we're definitely the new kids on the block. But, Marines are what we are, and we like to do what we do, and we like to take over missions. And, the Raiders are out there kicking ass and stealing missions from the SEALs and the Green Berets. And they're not too happy about it, but it's, a great rivalry we all have with each other. We can all make fun of each other, but we're all real tight. And I've had a great opportunity to work with some outstanding SEALs and Green Berets, and also some like the British SAS and other people like that. Just really outstanding people that I was able to operate with.
I'm sure Private Diet is quite content that you guys are there and doing well.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
So listen, you had another life, right? You went to school, you were born somewhere. You played. Give us that little background, and then please tell us how a decorated veteran like yourself in the Marine Corps is representing a cannabis company.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, to a lot of people, that's a big step, dude,
Yeah. It was kind of funny. It was like, I remember we were in High Times, and like, I didn't know anything about it. It just kind of popped up, and they did like special operation veterans or selling pot or something with the banner. But a lot of my friends text me when I woke up in the morning to these great texts. They're like, Buck had quite the trajectory to go there, like athlete, military. Next thing you know, now he's selling pot. It's like, how'd that all happen? But yeah, so I grew up in an area called Doylestown, Pennsylvania. It is probably about 30 miles north of Philadelphia. Big time Philadelphia sports fan, which Al can testify to that one. We've had some good back and forth on that. And where I grew up, it was like a football mecca. The high school I went to was a school called Central Bucks West. We were typically ranked in the top 25 in USA Today polls. My last 2 years there, we were top 5 teams. So it was just a juggernaut. And we kind of joked, what the Spartans would do. They would call it the 10-10-1, where the 5 finger or 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a unit. That was good, going to be a Spartan warrior. So if you were a male born in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, you pretty much were getting groomed to play football. And so that's pretty much my entire life as a young Bryan Buckley, was just wholly focused on playing for Central Bucks West High School. And went there, had a really nice career. Started every year I was in that school, won 2 state titles, mentioned before, previously ranked. I think my record in high school was 40 wins with 1 defeat, and that was a 3-year period. And so from there, I'll never forget my junior year, we're playing in the state playoffs, and we're playing this team called Central Dolphin, and their head coach was the former head coach of the Naval Academy. So I had a pretty good game. And next thing you know, my mailbox at school, I'm just getting a bunch of letters from Naval Academy. And my dad is like on top of the world. He's like, "Oh my God, Naval Academy, this is going to be amazing." And I'm like, not thinking anything about the military. And he's like, "Come on, you want to do it?" And I'm like, Dad, I just want to grow my hair long, drink some beer, meet some girls, play some football. And if I find the time, I'll walk into a classroom. That was kind of the mindset I had at that point. But I ended up going to the University of Massachusetts to play ball. And at that point, I was a 235-pound fullback. And one morning I woke up in September and turned on the TV. I was the first guy up. I lived with 4 other football players, and I saw the World Trade Tower was on fire. And I instantly went back to 1993, and I'm like, man, I didn't think the 1993 bombing was that bad. Like, had no idea what was happening. Pour a bowl of Cheerios, get a call from my buddy Dave Armstrong, who was playing football at the University of Michigan. And he's kind of like, oh my God, what's happening? Like, do you think everyone's okay at home? And I'm trying to catch up to him. Like, what are you talking about? And that's when you saw the second plane hit. And for, definitely my generation, that's when we kind of lost our innocence. We knew at that point we were under attack and things were going to happen. So during that day, I was kind of, some classes were going on, some weren't. Eventually, we had to go down to the football complex for practice. Inside the locker room, we had 3 big screen TVs. Obviously, we had the news on. I believe we had around about a dozen guys from like the New York City area. And this is when, we kind of have to age ourselves a little bit for some of our younger viewers. Cell phones back then weren't what they are today. We were still pretty much attached to landlines. So these guys couldn't, call home or get in touch with anyone. Jumped up on the trainer's table to get my ankles taped up. And the trainer's like, Buck, I don't think we tape up today. And I'm like, all right. So I just kind of walk back in the locker room, sitting in my locker watching TV. And our coach comes in and, talked about having a practice. And one of the captains stood up, said, Coach, I don't think we go today. And he's like, nope, that's fine. He's like, guys, go home, call your loved ones. Obviously, you can see how things can turn pretty quick here. And he's like, I don't think we're going to be playing this weekend. He's like, he just said, he's like, I'll never forget Pete Rozelle said his biggest regret as the NFL commissioner was playing football the week that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So we went out, got a couple cases of beer, went back to the apartment, turned on the TV just like everyone else was. And that's when they started showing people jumping out of the building. And I'll just never forget, there was this one woman, and she leapt out. And I just started thinking, I'm like, how terrible of a situation are they in that she's thinking this is her best course of action? She obviously knows what the end state's going to happen here. And I'll never forget, as she's falling, she was holding down her dress, kind of doing it with dignity. And it just spoke to me like that's America. And I know it sounds a little bit corny, but I just, everyone's sitting around talking tough. I just quietly got up, went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror and said, it's time for me to go earn my citizenship. And I knew somehow, some way I was going to get into that fight. And next day I called my buddy who was at the Naval Academy at the time, told him what I wanted to do. He's like, if you come to the Naval Academy, you got to start over. And I started thinking like, oh God, I'm going to miss the war. Stupid me. That thing went on for 20 some years. But we started talking about a school called Villanova University. And he's like, Villanova has one of the best reputations for Naval and Marine Corps officers. He's like, they're actually, if in terms of generals and admirals, Villanova is second behind the Naval Academy right now with the most flag officers in there. And Villanova was probably about 30 minutes from my house. So just kind of made sense. So I transferred to Villanova, and the original plan was I was going to fly for the Navy. While I had to go to Newport, Rhode Island, I had to make up 2 years of ROTC. And then I checked in at Villanova, and they have an individual there called an assistant Marine officer instructor, which will be a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, and they have to be drill instructors. And the gentleman I had was a guy named Gunnery Sergeant Donald Moeller, and he's what we would call a recon baby. Once he got through boot camp, did School of Infantry, he went right to reconnaissance, tried out, made it, and spent his career there in recon and that special operations training group. And just a really hard-looking dude. Like, if you had to draw a Marine, you're probably going to draw a guy close to this guy. And he pulled me aside one day, and he's like, you want to fly for the Navy? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, no, that's not you. And he's like, you need to come over to the Marine Corps and do some stuff here. So I went there, and, he's like, you need to get into reconnaissance. And that was my mindset at that point. I was just obsessed with getting into Marine recon. Once I graduated from Villanova, I received a commission into the Marine Corps. We had to start off in the infantry, so I had orders to 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We conducted a deployment to Fallujah, Iraq. And typically for Marine officers, you would have to stay in your infantry unit for 2 deployments before you can move on somewhere else. I had a pretty good deployment, and when I came back, they said, listen, we're going to give you an opportunity here. If you go take the Marine Recon Indoc and make it, we'll send you over to Recon a couple years early. And I'm thinking, great. Like, I was a platoon commander in the infantry. All my buddies now are getting ready to be executive officers, which, you know, you kind of lose your spurs a little bit. You're doing more admin stuff. But here I am having an opportunity to go have another command over in Recon. So went through, passed the Indoc, got orders over to the 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion in Camp Lejeune. We went back over to Iraq 6 months later. At this point, we were a kind of a quasi-force reconnaissance asset. Like I mentioned before, Force Recon was gone. It went over to MARSOC. But we were under command of the Marine Expeditionary Force. And the general who was in command of us was a man named General Gerganis, another outstanding flag officer. And he had us operating in the entire Al-Anbar province, which was western Iraq, which was a very volatile area. It was kind of the Sunni area. That's where you had Ramadi and Fallujah and some kind of key cities. If you can go back into the 2004 through 2008 timeframe, you heard a lot about that place. Had another successful deployment. Again, I was supposed to stay in Recon for a couple of years, but when I came back, they were starting back up Force Recon, and they asked me to take a Force Recon platoon. And I said, I'll do it, but can I be the first platoon out the door to go over to Afghanistan? And they're like, no, this one captain hasn't deployed in 2 years. He has to deploy. And that's when I started talking about taking the MARSOC selection. And my commander was kind of like, come on, man, like you don't want to be a MARSOC. You're a Marine, you know, all that stuff. And I'm like, well, sir, with all due respect, I'm like, if you look at our recruiting videos, you have guys running across bridges atop of lava. They've run across, they fight a dragon, and once they kill the dragon, they become a Marine. I'm like, these are the guys you guys are trying to recruit, people who want to see how far the rabbit hole goes. And I'm like, you know, I really want to go over to MARSOC and test myself and see what I can do. And he just looked at me, he goes, all right, that was a good sales pitch. And he's like, you're first lieutenant. This is actually probably a good time frame for you to go take selection. So he's like, here's the deal. You make selection, I'll cut you orders, and you can go over to MARSOC. So went over to selection. I think there was like 300 of us went over there to try out. Not a lot of us made it, but luckily I was one of the ones who made it through, and went to MARSOC and started doing deployments over in Africa, Southeast Asia, and as well as Afghanistan, in particular, the Helman province. And, you know, it was very interesting, a lot different from conventional forces. You're dealing with ambassadors, you're kind of dealing with some high level stuff. You're definitely going into places where they don't really have a lot of answers. That's kind of on us to figure out what's going on. And I would say probably the most dynamic deployment I did was my tour in Afghanistan in the summer of 2012. This is not anything to brag about. It just is what it is. I was told by a general that year, they're like, this has been the bloodiest summer for special operation forces since the Vietnam War. I had a 15-man Raider team, and I think I handed out 10 Purple Hearts. We had one KIA, and that was pretty successful compared to some other SEALs and Green Berets and other Raider teams. We're just losing a lot of guys. And to put how kind of volatile that deployment was, there were, at the time, you would have 3 teams in a Marine Special Operation Company, and each team was led by a Marine captain. And we got there in May. In June of that year, Captain Derek Herrera was shot and paralyzed, so he had to come home. In July, I got lit up by what they call underbarrel grenade launcher, or UGL. Took shrapnel all throughout my body, up into the left part of my head. Still have a lot of shrapnel in my body still. But, you know, when I came out of my first surgery, luckily my doctor was a former Army Ranger. And, you know, myself and 2 other of my teammates were wounded. And he's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, what are my options? And he's like, well, your 2 friends are going home. They want to send you home, but you're my patient. If you want to stay, I'll keep you. And I'm like, I'm staying. And he goes, I figure you're going to say that. And he just turned and said, listen, Captain Buckley's my patient. He's staying. And he looked at me. He goes, I need to do 2 more surgeries on you. So I'm going to give you about 24-hour rest, and then I'm going to give you about 48-hour rest, and then we should be good to go. And they did the next couple surgeries. And a couple of days later, I was back out in missions. The medical staff there was incredible, and they put Humpty Dumpty back together again and went back out and, kept fighting. And kind of what my team was doing, we had the Special Operations Mission. We had things called village stability platforms. So Raiders, SEALs, and Green Berets, they would go into villages. They would grow their beards out, wear traditional dress, do everything from building a well in that town to standing up a local police force. And ultimately, what they wanted to do was help them learn how to provide their own security and start up their own local economy so they could self-sustain. My team was the commando team. So I was in charge of the 7th Afghan Special Operations Kandak, or Special Operations Battalion. I was in charge of 777 Afghan commandos and special forces. We would take the Afghan special forces and have them supplement with the other village stability platforms. I would take the commandos out, and we built them like Army Rangers. They weren't there to hug or kiss or shake hands. They were there to smash. And we would go after Taliban high-value targets, or we would go support the village stability platforms to give them what we would call white space. The Taliban loved to fight us, so we would fight the Taliban and allow a little bit more freedom of movement for the VSP teams to maybe set up another police checkpoint and things like that. And unfortunately, later on that deployment, it was towards the end of October, our insert platform was the 160th Special Operation Aviation Regiment. If you ever saw Black Hawk Down, it was the Black Hawk Down pilots. These guys, they're all warrant officers, and these guys are the best pilots in the world. But had a helicopter incident where I had a spiral fracture and dislocated my ankle, and I had to stay on it for 2 days during the mission just because I couldn't bring more helicopters in, just due to the threat of them being shot down. So when I came back off that mission, basically I had to put my ankle back in place. They sent me to Germany. I had a deal with my CJ Soda commander, who it was ran by the Army Special Forces 7th Group, that I could do my surgery and rehab in Germany. Then it would bring me back down to Afghanistan. Clearly, I would not be able to go out and fight, but I'd be able to stay back in the rear and help plan. But my ankle was so swollen, they're like, we could do the surgery. We just wouldn't be able to put you back together again. So they had to fly me back to Cali and let my ankle chill out, let the swelling go down, did the surgery. But unfortunately, it was a pretty bad surgery, so I wasn't able to go back. But I was able to, rehab and get myself through it and go back out on a couple other missions before I ultimately left the Marine Corps.
Wow, that is amazing. I talk about dedication. Thank you.
Yes,
for all your achievements.
So let's go. Let's speed up to today. Bryan is married. Yep. I've never met his wife, but she's a charmer, I'll tell you. Couple of kids who he pays a lot of attention to. Yeah. He owns. I guess that's the right founder. How about you're the founder of a cannabis company? Yep. And you're a cannabis user, are you not?
100%. 100%.
All right. Well, so you're out of the Marine Corps. Let's go to today. You're out of the Marine Corps. I take it in the Marine Corps you did not use cannabis, and this all started after service. I might be wrong. And then then you got back with a bunch of your guys, and you all right? Go there.
Yeah. So left the Marine Corps. I got married. We started having some kids, and I started up a nonprofit called Battle Brothers Foundation. I was just kind of seeing, a lot of the nonprofits at the time were working more towards the active duty forces, which we needed. Right, we're fighting a two-front war. There was a lot going on. But I just noticed there wasn't a lot going on for veterans. Essentially, when I left the Marine Corps, it's like I checked out and got in my car and like a tumbleweed went by and I pulled out in a high five and that's it. It was all over. So I just thought, hey, we need to help these men and women. They did great things in the military, but they still got a lot of living left to do. And we need these great Americans to go off and do great things in civilian life. So started Battle Brothers Foundation. We help out on a personal, medical, and economic side, help you transition out. We help out VA disability claims. We can get you into treatment centers if you're suffering from opiates or alcohol, post-traumatic stress, all the above. And at the end, we want to find them a job too, and not just any job so they make some money, but something that is meaningful and purposeful to them, so we can hopefully avoid a mistake they can't come back from. But as I mentioned, I got shot up and shrapnel behind my knees and all this stuff. And, guys, I just couldn't sleep. And, I know we've all been there, and it's just a terrible feeling. And never consumed cannabis in my life, never had an issue with it, but just playing sports and obviously in the military, you just didn't really think about it. And someone said to me, they're like, why don't you try some cannabis? And I'm like, let's do it. So tried it, felt amazing. First time I felt like my joints were loose. And more importantly, I was able to sleep. And I kept using it, and it kept working. So I'm sitting there thinking, I'm 100% disabled. I can go down to the VA right now and get 15 pills like that. But this green plant's doing everything I needed to do. Why can't I get this prescribed to me? So went out and I met with some members of Congress. And it was a long meeting, but basically the gist of it was, what do you guys need to get this into the VA? And they said, listen, there has probably been no plant studied more than cannabis. Unfortunately, no Americans have done it. So what you're going to need to do is not just get data, but you're going to need an American face on it. They're like, good luck. So this is why I tell people never make comfort-based decisions, right? Like your alarm goes off at 5 a.m. and you're supposed to go to the gym, but that pillow feels good and you hit snooze, right? That's a comfort-based decision. So I'm going around trying to raise money for Battle Brothers. I'm just getting my butt kicked. And I did confirm to go to a cannabis symposium at UCLA. And guys, all I wanted to do at this point was go back to my house in San Diego and go to bed and be like, what the heck just happened today? But I'm like, listen, you made a commitment, go. So go there, listen to the first segment. Good doctors up there kind of talking the same stuff. And we get a coffee break and I go out and I meet this gentleman named Alon Blat. And Alon is from Israel, served in the IDF. And we just kind of started talking, and I told him about what I wanted to do. And he's like, well, I work for a company called Niamedic Healthcare and Research Services, and they've been doing cannabis research for a couple decades. Probably most famously, if you guys remember that Sanjay Gupta CNN interview, when he went over to Israel, he was actually with the nurses from Niamedic, and they were the ones taking them through the senior citizen centers where they really started doing their cannabis research. And he's like, listen, for anyone to take you serious, you're going to need to get this thing called an institutional review board. It falls under the FDA, and what it means is you've been cleared for human trials. Without it, you can't publish in medical journals. I'm like, okay. And he's like, you're probably not going to get much help from your government, and this is going to be pretty expensive, so good luck. So went home, and this idea came from a Paul Newman salad dressing bottle where it says profits to charity. And I'm like, well, what if we start an adult use brand in California where we donate our profits back to our research? And that's where we came up with Helman Valley Growers Company. And the four letters HVGC are very significant in the Marine Raider world. That is basically, it stands for the Helman Valley Gun Club, HVGC. So I threw those letters up on the wall, came up with Helman Valley Growers Company pretty quick. And I'm like, man, that works. Let me go brief the Raiders and make sure they're good with this. And when I told them everything I wanted to do, they're like, hey, not are we cool with you using the four letters, but can we get a job with you when we get out? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of essentially what we want to have happen, is have veterans making medicine for veterans. And we launched the company with our first $50,000 of profits. We had to put that forward to develop a study design to see if medical cannabis can reduce the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. It went back and forth a lot. They're asking us if we have an FDA license. Are we working with the National Institute of Drug Abuse, or NIDA? We said, no. We want to keep this in-house so we can control it. And eventually we got approved for it. And typically the IRBs are saved for medical companies or universities or colleges. So for a private company to get one of these, that was pretty significant. And that's been the whole mission behind Helman Valley, is to develop this treatment protocol and formulation, and see if one day, after we do enough of these studies, if we can get this into the VA, just not making medical cannabis legal for veterans, but for every patient that could benefit from it.
Well, I'm listening to quite a lot that's going on with your organization. So I get the impression you're not doing any of this alone. I mean, gosh, if you got You say if someone comes to you, they need help getting paperwork in, you can help do that. If someone needs help do it, you can help do that. And if you're working on, so I get the impression, and plus you've got a wife and kids, and unless I'm mistaken, they require at least 1 or 2 hours a week of your life.
Yeah, we keep a pretty tight timeline on that one.
So I'm thinking there must be a team of people that's around you.
Yeah. There's been a great group, just not veterans, but also just some really great citizens. People say, like, listen, I never served, I don't know. It's like, listen, these boys and girls went forward to fight for you. Now they're back here and they're not in such great shape. Now it's your turn to step up and fight for them. They went forward to go fight for your American dream. Now it's time for you to fight for them so they can go live their American dream.
Well, tell me about your team. Who makes your product? Who gets it out there? Who helps you with the paperwork? Who helps you with your research? Who helps you with all the things that you do? I mean,
so on the research side, we're working with a company called Niamedic that I mentioned before. The gentleman leading the steering committee is a man named Dr. Victor Novak. He's an Israeli, obviously worked with Dr. Meshulam. And he also at one point was in charge of Harvard's Clinical Research Institute. So really a big name. He's done a bunch of FDA trials. So he's the one really kind of guiding us of how we need to get this done. Because let's be honest, pharmaceutical is a big lobby group, and they're very powerful. And I tell people, you don't get elected by people, you get elected by money. And he's like, listen, if we call this like we're going to cure post-traumatic stress or do something like that, he's like, the American psychiatric units will just stomp us out. They're going to crush us before we even get going. So we kind of have to be a little bit meticulous how we're doing this. And one thing I failed to mention was once we got approved for the Institutional Review Board, we were able to bring UC Irvine as our principal investigators. So essentially we'll have Israeli doctors working with U.S. veterans and American doctors saying, yep, that happened. And it was kind of, it was a little difficult on that side because they didn't want to have, touching THC. I mean, now they're thinking about all these federal grants their university gets. But through working with lawyers, we basically came up like, you guys are essentially in an observational role. You're not touching anything. So you're not really handling THC. And that's how we were able to kind of do that little cutout to get them to approve it. And then, we got, some great groups that we're working with that we've partnered with. Right now, we've actually just launched a hemp line and working with a really great group called Smile and Wellness. You can actually go on their website and purchase some of our Delta products and things like that we have, and we can mail it right to your house. And on the Battle Brothers side, we got a great group of just awesome people. We got doctors from Stanford. We got former military officers. I have some of my family's part of it and some of my friends. So it's really been a great kind of call to action where people have rogered up to help out. And listen, this has been very difficult. I thought it was going to be a little bit more smooth and everything will be a little bit easier. You guys all are in the cannabis game and you get it. It's a really uphill battle and people are actively working against us, but I'm not deterred. This is the most important, besides my family in the professional sense, this is the most important mission of my life. I've not taken one red cent for me. I've been living off my disability since 2016, and that's all right because this is bigger than me or bigger than any one individual. We need to save the lives of these great Americans that raised their right hand and went forward to fight for us.
Yeah, Jack here is a testament to the fact that nobody ever got rich being a cannabis activist.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, but again, as veterans, and certainly you are a shining star on this, is that when all three of us here took an oath to defend the country, we took it, we lived it, and there's no expiration date.
No.
You see, that's the thing. And I think what a lot of people don't understand about veterans is that, until we just die, you're going to have to deal with us. and that may be in a positive way or a negative way or a neutral way. But the idea is guys like Casper and I hope me and certainly Bryan are still serving. Mm-hmm. And it's in service to your country, I think is obviously it's a wonderful thing. You've sort of gone beyond, and so we've talked about these IRBs, and we've talked about the fact that, and this is true, folks. Cannabis is the most studied. It's a plant, right? It's the most studied plant on Earth. There's this word, look it up. It's called hubris, HUBIRS, and this is what Bryan's talking about. American hubris about everything, whether it's who's got the prettiest ice cream, prettiest girlfriend, who makes the best ice cream, or cannabis research. If it isn't American, it ain't worth shit. I mean, that's basically what hubris means.
Yeah.
What we disregard the world, the whole damn world. There's a world right out there someplace, and it's a lot of people in it, a lot of smart people, and but it doesn't matter what they do, what they've done, and it's science. We got to have our own. So that's what Bryan's trying to do. It's a barrier that is ridiculous, but guys like he and I have had to deal with this for decades. Dealing with stupid. So if you're going to give somebody some money, give it to Casper so that he can pay his rent, and then send the foundation some money because they're doing good work, necessary work. And obviously, you can see by the leadership that they have here, it's all going in the right direction. And I really like the fact that you got some ex-Marines and you're giving these guys jobs in a really credible way.
Yeah,
I'm reading here on Bryan's bio about how the company, the Helman Valley Growers Company, profits go towards veterans research. For medical purposes. Is there some stuff that you'd like to mention? Some of the things that you guys have been involved in far as research in order to help with all this?
Yeah, sure. So the big research, obviously, we're doing the institutional review board that I brought up. So that's kind of the big part. But other things that we're doing is, we help out VA disability claims. So a lot of times the active duty guys, and I'm sure you guys went through when you were walking out the door, you're doing your final physical and you're kind of like, hey, whatever. And they mail you something. They're like, you're 60% disabled. You're like, oh, okay, fine. And they mail you some money here and there. I started noticing, I'm a Purple Heart recipient. Trust me, I did not want George Washington's ass on my chest, but it happens. They designate me at 80% disabled. I'm like, fine. And a lot of my buddies who are Purple Hearts were at 80%. Well, I'm not knocking admin people. We're all part of a big machine, but I'm just noticing people that might have not been out there fighting are walking out 100% disabled. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, well, they heard a story about this, or they saw this when a guy came back or something. And I'm like, man, this is messed up. So it really just started out where I was just helping out my friends get up to 100% disability, because that is a massive game changer, not just for you, but for your family. I'm like, we all went forward and we played around on the playground, but, the wives were back here, keeping the house like warm and raising the kids and doing all this. Well, This gives them a great opportunity to maybe go off and do some things they want to do and take care of your family. So we've had some really great success with that, especially like my friends in Texas. If you're 100% disabled, you don't have to pay property taxes, and that's where they get you in Texas. So, we got friends who are literally saving $25,000 a year just because they're 100% disabled. Some of the good things that we have been able to do is help veterans who are suffering with alcohol or opiates or post-traumatic stress. One big thing I tell everyone, and it's really difficult, I had a veteran, Army veteran, and turned out one night, he was struggling. I've been working with him. He was up in a Motel 6. Basically his family life was falling apart. And, I went to go check in on him, and I had to kind of get through the door. And I'm not saying this in a dramatic way, but he had a gun and he gave me the gun. I'm like, that's good. I kind of disassembled it and put it in my car, and drove him down to the hospital and had to get him into an inpatient therapy where, he had to walk in and say the words, "I'm thinking about killing myself," and things went in action. And, the guy there's a big mess. Like, he didn't have an ID. He tried to get on to Camp Pendleton. The Marines kept his ID because his car was all kind of out of whack, and he just drove right off the base. So we were trying to get him to a treatment center in Arizona, and we were trying to figure out how to get him there. And then he just kind of called up and flipped out on me. And it's like, he's like, why are you doing this to me? What with X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, hey, just stick with us. We're going to get you through it. And eventually he walked out and just kind of mother effed me and all this stuff. And I'm just kind of shocked. But what our director of treatment and recovery, he's like, listen, you popped your cherry. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, and my buddy's he's a recovering alcoholic. And he's like, listen, the 12 steps are a real thing. And he's like, I think it's step 3 is when you've got to ask for help. And he's like, if they don't want the help, it's never going to work for them. You can't want something for them. They got to want it themselves. And he's like, I've had guys on heroin that I know are going to die in about 2 weeks if they don't stay in treatment. But if they walk out and they don't want to do it themselves, it is what it is. So he's like, you kind of have to let them go. And, so that's kind of the tough part. But, Al and I both have a mutual connection where we were on a group called the Veterans Action Council. He came on and he just said, listen, I'm drinking too much and I need some help. And it was like, okay, if you're ready, we'll do it. And called up my the director of treatment and recovery. And about 3 days later, we had him into a treatment facility, and he's been sober since. So he really wants it. So that's why I tell people, it's like the veteran, they've really got to want to help themselves first to actually make this work. But we've had some great success stories there. And then job wise, it's been great helping people find work. And the nice thing about Battle Brothers is you don't have to start at point A and go to point Z. Sometimes I get a call and someone's like, I'm drinking too much. I need some help, or I need work, or I need something. That's fine. We gear it to you. And then we also work with other nonprofits. One thing we learned is if you're paralyzed, some great therapy is actually riding a horse, because a horse, the way it moves, it almost moves like a human moves. So you actually build up their core, and their core strength gets better. I'm not going to go start a horse farm, but if we can send vets and I can send that farm $5,000, we're going to do it. So we kind of like to work that as well. Again, just to meet the needs of that individual veteran so they can go forward and do some great things for our country.
It sounds like you guys are doing some great work. There's no doubt about that.
I'm trying. We're trying.
Well, Bryan, is there anything that you'd like to cover with us before we wrap up here?
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, you've given us incredible background information. I'm like, what's a Marine Raider? Wow.
Yeah.
But I just want to point out to those folks that don't know, especially our Canadian viewers, the U.S. Marine Corps is part of the United States Navy. It's not its own force, and that camaraderie between the two is fierce. Yeah. We in the Navy have the responsibility to take care of those guys that are getting on beaches and in holes. Yeah. And that's what our big guns are for. And we sit there waiting 24/7. If you need us, we're there. They know that. And then they take care of us too. It's mutual, is what I'm saying. It's a hell of a good relationship, and the guys that do that kind of work are always special, no matter the Air Force, Coast Guard, whoever the hell they are. They're cutting edge guys, highly trained women, super people serving the country. You're our first veteran interview for this cycle of Time for Hemp, and you certainly set a standard. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it, and I mean, you guys are legends. So just being here with you guys is quite a treat for me as well. One thing two things I like to share is, one, go on smilingwellness.com, SMILYN wellness.com, and go into the search bar and write HVGC, and you'll see our products pop up, and we can ship right to your house, fully legal, thanks to the 2018 Farm Bill. But again, those profits will go back to help support our research, which we desperately need. So real excited if you guys could help us out there. And, two, we spent some time talking about, who we are, and we took our oath, and that doesn't end until, we take that long dirt nap. But I do advise some members of Congress, and, to me, I don't care about political parties. I think the Republicans and Democrats have all lost their minds, but there is a thing called duty. And if your country calls on you, I think you got to answer that call. And, we're talking to some of these members of Congress, and I'm just going to bring it up, like the Ukraine war, and everyone's talking about this, and World War III and Poland. And I just asked a really simple question. I was like, can you guys tell me the political objective for Ukraine? What is the definition of success? What is it when we hit this mark, we've won, we're good? And they couldn't give it to me. And if you sit there and think about, since World War II, we've been in Korea, Vietnam, Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Iraq, and some other things that kind of maybe not as intensive time frame ones. And the only one we really set a political objective for was the Persian Gulf War. Get the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and we're done. And everyone felt good about it. We didn't have that in Korea. We didn't have it in Vietnam, didn't have it in Afghanistan, didn't have it in Iraq. And I just am amazed at how fast our elected officials are to send our greatest assets, our men and women, overseas to fight in wars. And you guys know it. You go there, you're never the same. We all have demons. You never beat them. You just got to learn to live above them. I just want you, for you all out there, just ask your representatives, what's the political objective? Why are we doing this? And it's just very unsatisfactory for them just to kind of send them out there to essentially fuel the military industrial complex and to maybe, disrupt some families in their lives and things that will never be the same. So I think it's our part. We are the government here. People forget that. And I think it's time that people need to challenge their representatives to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reason, not just whatever might be popular on the news or something like that. That's really been bothering me the past couple of months, and apologize. Didn't want to get political with you guys, but I kick myself if I walked away not saying that. But I think we got to do a little bit better of a job here.
I agree. I also feel that one of the aspects that people in the military share is their desire to be used as a vessel for freedom. That was something that I felt growing up. I always wanted to help somebody become free, either be free from an addiction to a vice that was killing them, or free from a horrible relationship, or make sure that our freedoms that we so much treasure here in our country are preserved. And I've noticed that when I go into areas where there's former members of the military who are breaking bread, they still have that air of let's be used as a vessel for freedom. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate and respect that you have continued to be a vessel for freedom. Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's true with Al Graham and Al Byrne here on the Big Broadcasting Network. We are vessels of freedom, free to smoke, yes, free to enjoy herb, free to have fun. Al Byrne and Al Graham, I'm going to let you both have a say goodbye to the audience moment. We'll start with Al Graham first, and then we'll go to Al Byrne next. Al, what do you want to say to the people out there?
Yeah, well, hey, everybody. Bryan, thanks for coming on to the broadcast here and sharing your story. I know that you could probably do 20 more of these broadcasts, just sharing the stories that you've been through and the experiences and stuff like that. For somebody like myself, I'm up here in Canada. I've never been involved in any of the wars. And when you're telling your story like you did today, it took me back to some of the stuff that I was seeing in the news or reading in the newspaper. And I saw the name of your company and the information on your bio. To me, you spent some time in hell. Mm-hmm. And you're here today to be able to tell us about your story. And believe me, it was upsetting, but I'm still here.
Thanks, Al.
Yeah, and I guess it's my time to say thank you again. We'll talk. Bryan and I will talk often, and we have, and we will. And he doesn't need my mentorship anymore. He's on his roll. But again, Bryan, thanks for coming by. Thanks for telling what you do. I'm hoping that the audience that we are going to try and talk to will be beyond the veteran community. Not that your story isn't important to them, but certainly to me, like Al Graham indicated, that these kind of shows put a different, they remove some stigma.
Correct.
I think is the best way to put it. Too much misconception, too much myth about everything. And so I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate you, as a guy. You certainly lived up to everything a Marine Corps officer looks like on the poster board anyway, huh? Except now the beard, I don't know. We're gonna go. All right. Well, thanks again, man. We'll talk soon.
Yeah,
and everybody thank Captain Buckley, U.S. Marine Corps, retired.
And I do want to remind people out there to hit the like button below if there is one. Share us with your friends. It has been said many more times than I ever want to think about. Everything old is new again. And I can tell you, we are old, but we are new again. We do have a large archive we want you to visit, share, and pass around. We also are going to be doing new broadcasts like this. We're learning how to operate the technology at our fingertips, and we hope that our broadcasting does get better. And the only way we're going to be found is if you let everybody around you know how important it is to take time for hemp.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spent. Take another look and spend some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yes, it's time for hemp. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 bales of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, time for hemp! Yeah!
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partners 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyndonega Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420. We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.